Hi, my name is Shan, and I am an author, radio host, and motivational speaker, all the way from the sunny coastal city of Durban in South Africa. So here's a quick heads up. My presentation today is definitely not going to be the conventional type of presentation as to how to attain and maintain a healthy mindset. But I can assure you one thing, it is going to be a presentation that is going to be painting a smile on many of your faces. And it is going to be one that you are going to easily be able to relate to. A little bit more about myself. Since I'm an author, I have a very creative imagination, and I tend to make a lot of references to books and movies, and that is something I'm going to be doing in today's presentation. So I want to ask you this question. Why does it matter so much when no one else believes in something? And that is the topic of my presentation. When no one else believes. So a little bit about myself and how it came to be that I became a motivational speaker. Well, my life has certainly not been a smooth journey. At the age of 12, I was diagnosed with epilepsy, which is a neurological disability. And in the 10 years to follow, my health plummeted, becoming more and more difficult as the years went on. In those 10 years, people wrote me off, and I was constantly told that I was living a life that was not worth living. Well, at the age of 22, I miraculously made a recovery. But those words that people had been saying to me began to play in my mind. I had completely lost belief in myself, and I lost myself. And it took me a further 10 years before I was able to find myself again, understand who I really was, and regain my self-worth. That is in total 20 years. And that is far too long a time. And I would never want anyone else to spend 20 years trying to regain their self-worth. And that is why I decided to share my experiences with the world and help people understand a different strategy which worked for me. Because believe me, in the 10 years after I recovered, it is not as if I did not make efforts to regain my self-worth and to find myself again. I went to hundreds of talks, and I literally mean hundreds of talks. And these were the conventional strategies that motivational speakers were sharing with the world. But for some reason, I became extremely rebellious as to implementing these conventional strategies. I felt that it was so easy for a motivational speaker to stand there and say, look into the mirror and say you're worth it, and things such as this. And I felt that saying it was one thing, but implementing it was something completely different. Not that I'm trying to say the conventional methods are wrong. No. For many people, they will work. But for me, they didn't. So, this is the strategy that worked for me. So, how did I rediscover myself? And how did I stumble across the strategy that I feel will help many people rediscover themselves after being in similar situations such as mine? Well, it was on a crazy day when my chakras were completely not aligned and my mental mindset was in a complete disarray that I decided to visit the beach. My mind just completely feeling helpless. I walked to the shoreline and I threw myself onto the wet sand in my tracksuit and tackies. And as I lay on the beach with the water lapping over my legs, for the first time in more than 10 years, in more than 20 years, I felt a glimmer of happiness. I felt a sense of release, as if I had taken all that worries and all that troubles and all that mental negativity and just let it flow into the ocean as the waves were running over my legs. I wondered why it was that I had not felt even that glimmer of happiness in such a long time. Looking around me as I still lay on the sand, I looked at a group of children who were playing at the water's edge. Their happiness was beyond comprehension. And then it took me back to when I was a child, and the memories started just flooding in. And I started wondering why it was that I did not feel that way any longer. And then I realized the answer was staring me in the face. Children. The answer was children. Children? You'll be asking yourself, what does children have to do with someone's mental mindset? Well, that is what I'm going to be exploring much further in the rest of the presentation. So buckle up, because here goes. So what is the meaning behind the word belief? Well, it can be looked at from two perspectives. Firstly, it is when you believe in something without evidence that it really does exist, such as religious beliefs. And secondly, it is a firmly held opinion, when you believe in something so strongly that you refuse to let anyone else say otherwise. Now, I want to take you to a movie that recently caught my attention, where the belief of the people in the movie really touched my heart. And that is something I wish to bring to your attention and highlight before we go any further. Well, the name of this movie was The Greatest Showman.
When the sharpest words wanna cut me down, I'm gonna send the blood, gonna drown them out. I am brave, I am bruised, I am who I'm meant to be. This is me. Look out, 'cause here I come. And I'm marching on to the beat I drum. I'm not scared to be seen, I make no apologies. This is me.
Well, that was a vibey and very catchy musical video, that is for sure. But I hope, like me, you saw something much deeper than that. Because in every single scene and in every word that was sung, there was meaning. There was a very deep meaning that is very applicable to having a positive mindset. The characters in that movie, well, as if you were listening carefully to the lyrics, they felt bruised, they felt scarred, but they did not care. They walked into that room where there were people who considered themselves to be the so-called norm, but they did not care. Although initially it did hurt, initially it did cause frustration and pain, they found themselves and they realized that irrespective of what the rest of the world said, irrespective of whether the people in that room believed that they were worth it or not, they felt that they were worth it. They understood who they really were within themselves. They found themselves and they were proud of themselves. And that is why the song is called This Is Me. So it's fantastic to just stand there and say, this is me. But of course, as you watch the song, it is a journey. It is a journey that all of us have to encounter. But the pace at which it takes us to actually find ourselves and say, this is me, is up to you. You can determine that pace. And if you use the strategies appropriately, you can get there a lot faster than I did. Well, I want to now take you to the current situation we are facing. The world is being faced with a crazy pandemic, which none of us would have anticipated. And a lot of negativity is being thrown in our direction. So now is a time where we need to really put into practice all the methods and strategies that are going to help us maintain a positive mindset. And if we are not currently at that point in our lives, we need to quickly find ourselves, and then you will be able to say, this is me. Well, now it's time to get down to that strategy that I discovered when I was lying on the beach. Children. As you were probably asking yourself, what does so much have to do with a child? Well, do you remember when you were a child and you so passionately believed in Santa Claus, the Tooth Fairy, and superheroes such as Spider-Man and Superman? Did it matter when adults told you that such myths and fantasies did not exist? When your grumpy uncle told you that Santa Claus was not going to climb down the chimney and leave you any presents? No, not at all. Because you believed. You believed so passionately in something that it didn't matter whether anyone else believed or not. Because all that mattered was that you believed. And when you believed, it brought you this sense of happiness and fulfillment that was so bright within you, that burned so fiercely, that nothing that anyone said could dampen that fire. Do children today still believe in such myths and fantasies? Yes, they do. Now, don't get me wrong. The point that I'm trying to make is not whether Santa Claus is a fact or fiction, but that these stories were told for a reason. They were not merely for the pointless entertainment of adults, and so that grumpy uncle could laugh at his nephew because Santa wasn't going to climb down the chimney. Every story that is told to a child is told with a significant meaning. It carries moral values, such as kindness, joy, good, overcoming evil, in the case of superheroes. But us as adults today, if we had to introspect, do we still have that fiery belief that we had when we were kids? If someone at the office had to tell you something, would you take it into account and would it influence your opinion? Would you start listening to Grumpy Uncle when he told you that you were absolutely wrong in what you believed in? Unfortunately, the opinions of others and what others believe now has a massive influence on the decisions that we make and the way we carry ourselves out. But what happened? Somewhere in between childhood and adulthood, there was a turning point where our belief, the way our mind functioned, our train of thought suddenly altered. What was that turning point? Let us try to figure it out. So now as adults, frustration has set in. There is a huge burden on our shoulders, and life is not as easy as it was when we were kids. But the transition, that turning point, is something we really need to find. And the only way we can find is by reflecting on our own lives. Now, before we go into how we are actually going to find that turning point, I want you to think about your current situation. Now, one of the solutions that many people say to a healthy mindset, a healthy outlook of life is by surrounding yourself with positivity, by being surrounded by a positive environment. But unfortunately, that is really not that easy. It sounds simple and it works. 100% it does. But most of us really don't have a choice as to the office we're going to work in. We don't have a choice as in the family we were actually born into. And we don't have a choice as into the area that we are surrounded by. Within us, we may be good people, but we may be situated in an area where there are people dealing with drugs, theft, there's lots of negativity. And financially, we may not be able to take ourselves out of that. But there are ways to block it out if you look within yourself. It doesn't just take a movie like The Greatest Showman. Even in today's world, in real life situations, we are bruised and battered. We have to listen to hurtful words. But we do not need to fall prey to all that negativity. Even if we are forced into a surrounding where that negativity is there, we can block it out if we find the inner self. If we start believing in ourselves, we find our self-worth, that joy and happiness within us will be the only thing that matters. And it will be so powerful that it will completely override the negativity in the situation that you are finding yourself in. Going back to children and the significance in my presentation of how important it is that the happiness we see in children needs to be reignited in adults, I want to take you to a party I went to a year ago. At this children's party, the adults were sitting in one section while the children were playing happily, carefree and full of joy, and the bountiful energy could actually be felt from where I was standing. But as to the adults, gosh, well, if it was not gossip, it was frustration and it was constant complaining. I then heard one of the parents saying to another parent, well, my child does not know what the real world is like yet. So I want to ask you that question. Have you ever heard somebody make mention of that? The real world. What is the difference between a child's real world and an adult's real world? Does a child not walk on the same grass as an adult? Do children and adults not breathe the same air? Do we not eat food grown from the same soil? There is no difference between the world that a child lives in and the world that an adult lives in. But again, I want to highlight that something happened in between the transition from childhood to adulthood to make us lose that bountiful joy and happiness, to make us lose that belief within ourselves, to make us lose our inner child. What is it that went wrong? Something else I want you to bear in mind is the soul. The soul of a child and the soul of an adult. When we are born, the soul enters your body. So when you were a child, you had a soul. You've grown up and now you're an adult. Did that soul leave your body and did an adult soul enter your body? No, not at all. The same soul that you had as a child is the same soul within you now. And if that soul had the power to find the joy, the happiness, and that carefree prosperity that you felt as a child, you still have that ability to find that inner you. So remember that it's your mindset that's changed and nothing else. If you were able to change that mindset, if you felt prey to changing that mindset somewhere along the line, you have the power to change the mindset back into a positive mindset. So something I want you to think about is in that transition from childhood to adulthood, we often don't realize how much the subconscious mind has an impact on our everyday lives. Well, think about this. Think about a nursery rhyme you learned as a child, or a Christmas carol, or even your school prayer. Does it still come to mind? When was the last time you said a nursery rhyme, or the school prayer, for example? Well, since I don't have children, I last said a nursery rhyme when I was a child. But I can still very easily remember the words to the song Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. If I had to now try to recite the nursery rhyme Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, I can easily do so. But that's because it was said to me so many times as a child, it became registered in my subconscious mind. So as I lay on the beach, I realized that all those negative comments that I had been hearing for 10 years when my health was at its lowest, somehow registered at the back of my mind. And even though I was attending all these conventions to try to bring my spirits up, to try to help me regain my self-worth, it wasn't helping enough because I was at such a low that I couldn't achieve what I wanted to. So, although I cannot erase everything that was said, it was said, but I need to find a way to acknowledge that what everybody else believed did not matter. The only thing that mattered was what I believed. And that is when I realized I also needed to go back and try to remember when it was the last time I felt happy. As I told you, I felt a sense of happiness as I lay on the wet sand. So when was the last time I felt even happier than that? And that was when I was a child. So when I reflected upon what it was that made me reach my happiest point when I was a child, and I'm talking about below the age of 10, strangely enough for me, it was books. And that is why you see this lovely collection of books here. But believe it or not, in the 20 years that I was struggling to regain my self-worth, I never opened a book, not once. That is insane. But after my trip to the beach, the first thing I did is I took a trip to the bookstore. I purchased one of my favorite books, and that was, strangely enough, an all-time classic called Little Women. I read the book and I felt a sense of joy that I cannot express to you. It made me also remember things that happened before my illness. And that was when my journey to finding myself began. I began to understand me without all the negativity, without all those comments that people had said. I realized who I really was, and I realized what brought me joy. And it didn't matter whether I was the richest person in the world or the poorest person in the world. I found joy. That was how I went about rediscovering my inner self and rediscovering who I really was and what it was that was the source of my joy and happiness. Now, the question is, how do you go about rediscovering your inner self, finding out your source of joy, and regaining your self-worth? Well, I've mentioned the turning point on many occasions. So, for me, when I reflect and I analyze things, there clearly must be some sort of turning point when, as a child, we lost that belief as we transitioned into adulthood. Well, something that did cross my mind, and that I firmly believe could very well be the reason that many of us lost that sense of belief, was when I go back to the stories such as Santa Claus and superheroes, things like the Tooth Fairy. Well, obviously, as we grew up, there was a point in time that maybe you noticed that mom and dad were actually wrapping the presents when you were awake late at night. And obviously that was a huge disappointment. Obviously, you would have felt foolish and grumpy uncle would have won the day. But unfortunately, what parents often don't tend to stress is that, as I have already mentioned, the point behind all these tales and myths and stories is not whether there really is a Santa Claus or whether there really is a Superman. It's that there is kindness, there is joy, there is hope. So irrespective of who puts the gift under the Christmas tree, it really does not matter. What matters is that there was someone who was kind enough to do so. When that first realization that we were foolish actually hit us, is when we start falling prey to everything that others are telling us. You know, when we get to a school-going age, we often hear the older people telling us, you need to listen to adults, you need to listen to people older than you because they've been through life, they know what obstacles are, they know what hurdles are, and only if you learn through their experiences, if you listen to their experiences, will you know how to live your life. Whilst we need to go to school, we need to get an education, we need to try to go to university, what we need to learn along the way is the facts that you will get in the books. And everything that you hear from adults through their experiences, the decisions that they made in their lives, are not necessarily the best decision that you should now implement in your own life. Because somewhere along that path, you start listening too much to what others are saying, and you forget what you really want. You forget your own ambitions, and you forget what it is that really brings you joy. So I have now come to the end of my presentation, and I've shared a lot of unconventional ways of thinking with you today. I've shared with you my method and the way in which I rediscovered who I was. And that was by reflecting upon the last time that I felt nirvana. I felt pure bliss, peace, joy, and happiness. And the last time I felt like that was when I was a child. So why don't you try it? Try to remember when it was that you last felt absolute happiness. And I'm almost certain that most of you are going to be saying it was when you were a child. And if that is the case, I want you to try to recall all the things about your childhood that made you feel that absolute sense of bliss and happiness. For me, it was books. For you, I don't know what the answer was or is, but you do. And you are the only person who can reignite that source of happiness. Because technically speaking, that source of happiness is not on the shelf. That source of happiness is within your heart. It is within your soul. And once you reignite it, you will find that fountain of joy and happiness will never stop flowing again. So there's one more clip that I want to show you. And I want you to remember something after you watch this clip. People can call you crazy. People can say whatever they want to. No one else needs to believe except you. So don't stop believing.